Hey guys, and welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Laptop fans and AMD fans and Ryzen fans and I guess HP fans as well all got excited about the new Envy x360 that launched late last year. It's for good reason too, because this beast is the first laptop to hit the market with an AMD Ryzen APU inside. This is the very laptop I used for our first Ryzen mobile benchmark video you probably saw a couple of weeks ago, pitting it against Intel's 8th gen Kaby Lake refresh CPUs. Now, while of course Ryzen Mobile is super interesting, the Envy x360 is worth talking about in its own right, especially as AMD enthusiasts or really anyone looking for decent laptop graphics might be interested in buying one of these systems. It's also available in an Intel version, but Ryzen really is the star of the show here, so we'll be ignoring the Intel model for most of this review. So the Envy x360 is HP's mid-tier 15-inch convertible laptop, which sits below the Spectre x360 that's available in 15 and 13-inch sizes. As it's a convertible, it has a 360-degree hinge that allows you to use it in various modes, like a tablet, a tent, a stand, or just a standard laptop. It's sometimes handy to have convertible functionality, though at this size, using the system as a tablet is a bit difficult, so you'll probably stick to the laptop mode, I guess, for the most part. The display is a typical 15.6-inch 1080p IPS LCD touchscreen, and there's a standard range of configurable hardware, 8GB up to 16GB of DDR4 RAM, 256GB through to 1TB SSDs, plus 1TB hard drives, and a rather small 55.8 watt-hour battery. More on that later. And the processor in the AMD model at least is a Ryzen 5 2500U without additional discrete graphics. If you opt for the Intel variant, you'll have the choice between a Core i5 8250U or Core i7 8550U, either with or without discrete NVIDIA GeForce MX 150 graphics. This is a typical hardware combination for 15-inch laptops, and it'll continue to be the main competitor for Ryzen Mobile with its powerful integrated graphics in this form factor. And a quick note on price: the base Intel model is currently available for $700, while the Ryzen Mobile variant costs $750. If you're after the Intel plus MX 150 combo, that'll set you back $800 US for otherwise equivalent hardware, which makes Ryzen Mobile that little bit cheaper. While the Envy x360 isn't a top tier laptop price-wise, the build quality is really nice. In many ways, it rivals the Spectre, which is HP's super slim 13-inch notebook, which I really liked back when I reviewed it a while back. HP has used a combination of metal on most surfaces with a subtle brown tinge, along with a glossy glass protecting the display and grey-toned keyboard and trackpad. When paired with minimalist branding like the new HP logo, which I reckon looks fantastic, and some subtle Envy text, this laptop looks great and it also feels quite sturdy. Despite the size and weight of the display assembly, the 360 hinge is strong and allows fluid movement. I love deliciously slim bezels on laptops, but HP hasn't quite nailed it on the Envy x360 like they did with the Spectre x360. It feels like there's a bit of wasted space here, although I guess HP has to offer a few sweet bonuses for those that fork out more cash for that Spectre x360. One thing HP does fit in the bezels is a Windows Hello camera for quick facial recognition, which is a quick aside, seems to be getting quicker each time I use it and even more accurate on each new device, which is always nice to see. So let's talk ports, the most boring but one of the most crucial aspects to a laptop. The Envy x360 does reasonably well here. 2 USB 3.1 Gen 1 Type A ports on each side, along with a USB 3.1 Gen 1 Type C port. This isn't a Thunderbolt 3 port, as Ryzen Mobile doesn't support Thunderbolt. Not that it matters too much, I guess, as the Intel variant of this laptop also doesn't include Thunderbolt 3. Other ports include a 3.5mm headphone jack, full-sized HDMI 2.0B, an SD card slot, and disappointingly, I guess, a proprietary charging port. It would have been neat if it charged over USB-C, but it can't. The Envy x360 does include Bang & Olufsen speakers, like many other HP laptops. Bang & Olufsen are known for making a high-end speaker system, so it always strikes me as a bit strange that they put their brand on crappy laptop speakers like this. Seriously, these speakers are no good, and they sound even worse, if that's possible, when you disable the Bang & Olufsen Experience software setting. But on a completely different note, the keyboard on this laptop is very similar to the Spectre's keyboard. In other words, it's excellent, with a solid clicky response rarely seen on slim ultra portable keyboards. Travel distance is great. It's a 15-inch laptop, so you also get a numpad, and the layout is generally good. My only real complaint here are the half-height arrow keys. Surprisingly though, the trackpad on this laptop isn't that good. I'd probably say it's below average for this class. Previous HP laptops I've used have included a decent trackpad, hence the surprise here, though I wouldn't say it's unusable or anything. Moving on to the display, and it really isn't good news for HP here. The Spectre line uses high quality panels, but it's clear that with the Envy x360, the display is one area where cuts have been made. For starters, there's nothing inherently wrong about the tech used here. I've seen plenty of 15.6-inch 1080p IPS LCDs that perform well. This panel has good viewing angles and a decent enough resolution, so I guess that's something. Unfortunately though, brightness is very weak, with a peak output of just 217 nits, well below standard for this sort of laptop. Contrast is good at 1500 to 1, but that's not worth much when the display itself can't get that bright. As for color performance, the Envy x360 does a reasonable job in grayscale with a respectable color temperature just below what is accurate, and okay, though not terrible, delta E values. However, the display can only output 67% of the sRGB spectrum, which is very poor and leads to muted, undersaturated colors. Hitting 100% sRGB is standard these days in all but the cheapest of panels, and without this feature, there is no way any creator, or really anyone that likes a good display, would consider using it. You might have guessed already, but the lack of proper sRGB reproduction leads to terrible delta E averages in saturation and color checker tests. And unfortunately, as the issues are largely down to the sRGB coverage, it's not something that can be addressed through calibration. As I've covered the performance of the Ryzen 5 2500U extensively in a separate video, I'm not going to go into detail about the performance of this laptop. If you're interested in a ton of benchmarks for this APU in this very laptop, check out my review of the Ryzen 5 2500U, or check my previous coverage of Intel's 8th gen CPUs if you're thinking of picking up an Intel variant. What I will give you guys here is a brief highlights package of how the Envy x360 with its Ryzen 5 2500U performs. When looking at CPU workloads, the Ryzen 5 2500U is behind Intel's 8th gen Kaby Lake refresh CPUs, but only marginally in some cases. Typical results see the Core i7-8550U pull ahead by 10 to 25%, though this margin is slimmed when comparing the Ryzen 5 APU to a Core i5. And if you're coming from literally any other older 15-watt CPU generation, you'll see gains of more than 50%, which is particularly handy for intensive tasks like video editing. On the GPU side, if you're comparing the Ryzen 5 2500U to a straight 8th gen CPU with integrated graphics, it's a big win for Ryzen. The Vega 8 GPU is more than twice as fast as the UHD 620 graphics in the i7-8550U in GPU heavy workloads like gaming, which in some situations allows games to become playable where on Intel systems they are not. If you introduce an NVIDIA GeForce MX 150 into the mix, which is available in some Envy x360 models, it's a bit of a different playing field. The MX 150 is faster than Vega 8 in the range of 30 to 60% judging on most data I've seen, so considering it only costs an extra $50 or so to upgrade to this discrete GPU, that will be well worth it for most people. Like many other laptops on the market, the Envy x360 makes use of Samsung's PM961 for its solid-state storage. The PM961 is a PCIe NVMe SSD equivalent to the 960 Pro, so it's decently fast, good for well over 1 GB sequential reads and writes, along with respectable random performance. Surprisingly, this isn't one of the areas HP skimped on. Maybe they should have gone with a slightly slower and cheaper SSD and used the leftover cache to improve the display. Battery life is one of the more interesting aspects of the Envy x360, as it's the first time I've been able to examine how the Ryzen 5 2500U performs in this regard. Of course, comparing laptops to other laptops isn't an apples to apples comparison, and it can be quite hard to uncover just how a CPU or APU itself can affect battery life, but I've tried to dig into the data I have so far. The The main thing to note here is the Envy x360 actually has quite a small battery for a 15-inch laptop at just 55.8 watt hours. Typically we see at least 70 watt hours in a machine of this size, if not up to the 100 watt hour range, but around 56 watt hours is more like what we see in 13-inch notebooks. So this already puts the Envy x360 at a disadvantage up against its competitors. It therefore shouldn't come as a surprise that the battery life produced by this laptop isn't fantastic. In fact, it's quite poor, and from reading other reviews, it seems like this is the case whether you purchase the Ryzen mobile model or the Intel model. If the battery was more in line with the display size, something around 75 watt hours for example, battery life would be acceptable and in line with other decent enough laptops I've reviewed. The HP Envy x360 ends up as a laptop that does a couple of things really well while letting you down big time in a few other areas. While we are looking at a cheaper and lower tier product than HP's flagship Spectre line, I feel a more balanced approach would have led to a better final product here. Where the Envy x360 succeeds, it's undoubtedly in its main hardware. Most configuration options leave you with either a Ryzen 5 2500U or an 8th gen core CPU paired with MX150 graphics. You'll be getting plenty of CPU and GPU horsepower here, with the Intel Nvidia combination giving you the best bang for your buck, considering the discrete GPU is more powerful than AMD's integrated Vega 8 GPU in Ryzen Mobile, and it only costs slightly more for that configuration. The design is also great from both a visual and construction standpoint, with nice bonuses such as a Windows Hello camera. But the real deal breakers here are the display and battery life. The display isn't capable of full sRGB coverage, so it looks dull and undersaturated, plus it lacks top-end brightness. And the battery capacity is simply too small for a 15-inch laptop, falling more in the 13-inch category, which leads to poor battery life when you move up to that larger display. And by the time you configure the Envy x360 to something worth using, the $700 base model doesn't include SSD storage, for example, you'll find yourself spending around $1,000 US, which simply isn't worth it. The competing Lenovo Yoga 720 starts at $950, and for that price you get a much faster CPU and GPU, along with basics like an SSD and a suitably large battery. It ends up as a bit of a shame that the first Ryzen mobile laptop isn't actually that good, but I hope we have a few more options to look at as the year progresses. Maybe Acer will send over their Swift 3 with Ryzen inside. Maybe, please? I guess if you're listening, Acer, hit me up and I'll happily take a Swift 3 off your hands, but apart from that, I'll catch you next time.